What's up guys, Eric Vasquez here from teachmetodesign.com, and today is our second video in a design theory video series, and I want to talk to you about the second element of design, working with shapes. In the first part of the video, I'm going to give you guys a couple of ideas and show you the different kinds of shapes and how they can be used in things like logos and illustration. Then, in part 2, we'll be doing a quick demo so that I can show you a handful of ways that you can use Adobe Illustrator to create custom shapes of your own that'll be sure to help you design better. Alright guys, so as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about working with shapes. So you'll see here on this first page we've got what are called geometric shapes. Now these are all the shapes that are made up of angles. They either have right angles or 45-degree angles, and they're shapes that are not typically found in nature, but if you break down a lot of shapes in nature, they can be broken into these shapes. So what I mean by that is, for example, when you see drawing books and things like that, they'll show you, in order to effectively draw the human form, they'll break it down into circles and ellipses and rectangles and things like that. So it can really help you to kind of simplify pretty much anything in nature by using these geometric shapes. And you'll see on this page we've got a bunch of them. We've got squares, rectangles, trapezoids, parallelograms, all kinds of stuff that I tried to come up with just to demonstrate what geometric shapes look like. So some more geometric shapes that you may be familiar with are things like pyramids and cones and spheres. So just like when you're trying to break things down into their basic shapes, once you start using these shapes, it'll actually give your images or your drawings and everything like that a little bit more depth and form. So aside from geometric shapes, we also have organic shapes. Now these are the kind of shapes that are typically found in nature, and they're a little bit more free-flowing, not always having, the hard angles that you'll see in some of the previous shapes that we were looking at. But at the same time, your eye knows what these things are. And it's amazing how just having a strong silhouette, you're able to actually identify these things because our brain just puts it together. So even if I didn't have this text here describing what these things are, it's a safe bet to guess that you guys would probably know. Take this image for example. You obviously know what it is. It's a bench. But look at the shapes. You'll see all the black areas are these positive shapes, but then the areas that are kind of knocked out of it are what we would call negative shapes. And by using those two things together, both positive shapes and negative shapes, your mind is able to kind of figure this puzzle out in a fraction of a second to identify what this is. On this page, take a look at some of these logos. I'm curious to see, just from looking at it, how many of these you guys can identify. And without having any text here, I'm sure you can probably tell what most of them are. So now, just putting the labels back on them, you can see how powerful shape is, especially when we use it in things like logos. And again, these are all just one color logos, and any good logo should be able to communicate effectively in black and white. And that's one of the important things to remember, that getting into logo design, I know a lot of people want to jump into color variations and showing gradients and shadows and glows and things like that, but you have to remember that you have to be able to identify a logo in its simplest form first, before you can add all the other stuff. If it doesn't work in black and white, it's probably not going to work no matter what color you put it in or how many shadows and glows you add to it. And that's just something to keep in mind as you get into designing logos and branding and things like that. These are all instantly recognizable, and they're all just made up of shapes. So now we have a couple of examples here that I wanted to show you guys. You'll see this image on the upper right. It's a pretty well-known image, and it's made up of the positive and negative shapes that I was talking about. So if you just look at the black shapes, it obviously kind of looks like two faces looking at each other. But if you look at the negative shape, the white area, it looks like a vase. In the image below that, you kind of have something similar in the core of an apple. It's a little more obvious what the object in the center is, but it's a very clever use of positive and negative space, which also you see here in the criminal underworld poster of Batman versus Penguin. So moving on, here are a few other examples of very good uses of shape. In this illustration for Peter and the Wolf, the artist has used the shape of the wolf to kind of leave an area where you can see the silhouette of the boy Peter. That use of negative space is, very important in helping to sell this and tell what it is. And then in the other image, you have an illustration that was made for the Revenant, and it uses this silhouette of a bear, and then inside of that, you're seeing other imagery that is helping to tell the story. So not only is shape being used in things like logos, but also in illustration and movie posters and other forms of design as well. And you'll see a few more examples of that here. Some of these iconic movie posters. Now it's interesting because obviously the Batman poster, some people say it's a little similar to the Star Trek poster, but they're both using shape really well, and that's the important thing. So in both examples, you're using the environment or the surroundings as the positive shapes, and the logos are being knocked out of it or using the negative space to show the logo itself. And here we have a couple other examples of shapes that I just wanted to show you guys really quick. In the upper left, you have an example of shape being used in a web design layout. The website is Built by Buffalo. It's a really cool looking website, very well designed, and I thought that it used shape very well, so I wanted to show you guys that. In the example in the bottom, you'll see how shape is being used in packaging. Again, the negative shape is revealing what's inside the package with the fettuccine, spaghetti, and so forth. And then on the image on the right, you'll see a really good use of shape used in this news leader layout. So it's using, a silhouette of a Sasquatch, basically, but it's also showing you a forest, which is, a really kind of a striking and unexpected use of shape. I'm jumping over here into a new document, and I'm just going to use a basic square shape. So I'm just holding down the Shift key, clicking and dragging, and then over here in my toolbar, you'll see you have a fill and a stroke color. At the moment, I don't want a white stroke, so I'm just going to check off this little box with the strike through it and to set that to none. Now, once you have a shape like this, there's a lot of things you can do with it. You'll see if you select any of the corners, first press A to get your direct selection tool. You can select any of these points and just move it around. So you can, pull and push any of these points, or anchor points if you will, in order to create some unique shapes. But, what happens if you want to do something a little bit different? You can rotate these shapes, you can skew them, and you can also do some things using the object menu and coming to transform. You have things like rotate, reflect, scale, and shear. And shear is actually a pretty interesting one because it kind of allows you to enter an angle. So you can say, let's say 15 degrees, how much you want to skew it, and then you can skew it either vertically, horizontally, or by a specific number again, in order to get just the right shape that you're looking for. So something like this, and you can also enter negative values as well. So let's say you want to do that. From here, you can just use your regular arrow tool. You can modify this shape, you can duplicate it, make a few copies of it, something like this. And now, if we were actually working on trying to piece together a logo or doing something like that, you're not going to want to have all of these separate shapes. At a certain point, you're going to want to simplify it so that you don't have all of these anchors. And the best way to do that is by using the Pathfinder tool. Now, I have it open over here, but if I didn't have it open already, I could access it by coming to Window, Pathfinder. Now, what's great about the Pathfinder is it offers you a lot of things that you can do with shapes. And the first one, the Unite option, will merge all of your shapes together. So let's say you have a circle or an ellipse, a a bunch of shapes like this, just random. Say it's like a cloud or something, right? Kind of a cartoon cloud. You're not going to want to have all these points because if you try and grab it, you know, you might not grab the whole thing. You can do this and grab all of it, or you can group it, which is great. But at some point, again, you're going to want to unite it so that you can just make that one solid shape. Now, let's say you wanted to knock something out of this shape, that is, remove a piece of it. If I make another circle, and this time I'm just going to fill it with white so that I can kind of see what's happening as I move it on top of my united shape that we just created. Now what we have, we're using the negative space to create a more interesting shape. But if I have this on a transparent background, I'm obviously going to see the white circle that I just made. So how can I get rid of that? Well, I'm going to use the same tool, the Pathfinder tool, except instead of uniting the shape, we're going to choose the minus front option. And that will just knock it out of the shape. So you see how easy and quickly you can add to shapes or subtract shapes. Or let's say I wanted to actually divide this shape and cut it in half. I'm going to make a few lines, select each one, and then just kind of group these together by pressing Command G. And then I'll hold down the Shift key and select my back shape here. Now from there you can try one of these other options like trim or merge or divide. And when you do that, it's going to take these lines and basically cut it through the shape. So what I mean by that is now if I ungroup this by pressing Command Shift G, you can pull these other pieces out of it, which is how you'll sometimes see logos that are like sliced or look like they've been cut in half. So let me just show you really quickly in an example with some text. All right, I'm going to make this bigger, get rid of these shapes here. The first thing you're going to do is convert it to outlines, because right now you don't really have any points to pull around like we did earlier with our shapes here. You know, you need these anchor points. So the easiest way to do that is to press Command Shift O, or select your type and come up here to the type menu and choose Create Outlines. Now you'll see that you have all of these anchor points. So if we do the same thing and just take a black stroke and just make a line here, you can now select both of these and press Divide again in your Pathfinder panel. Ungroup it, Command Shift G, and now you can kind of space out all these letters and move them around using your arrow keys. So that'll give you that kind of effect like the shape is being cut. Alright, so these are some ways that you can create interesting shapes pretty quickly and easily in Illustrator. But there's still a few other things that you can do that I wanted to show you guys. Illustrator also has a few built-in tools that are pretty cool, and it's over here. If you hold down the mouse and select this, you will see that you have things called the Warp Tool, the Twirl Tool, Pucker, Bloat, Scallop, Crystallize, and Wrinkle Tool. And it even gives you a little preview of what some of those things do. Now if you select that little arrow on the side of the menu, it will detach it so that you can move it around freely if you want. You don't have to do that, but it's just a little tip. Now the Twirl Tool, you'll see if I just click on an area here, it does just what you would expect it to. But if you hold down Shift and Alt, it'll actually allow you to enlarge, to increase or decrease the size of the twirl that you want to make. So now when I do it, I'm getting a much larger kind of shape. And that might not be exactly what you want, but you can kind of tinker around with it to get something interesting. And again, you can add to it and unite the shapes, or you can even knock shapes out of it like we did before. Right? So let's just check out some of these other options here as well. And just experiment with these and see what they do, You can do this on type or shapes, basically anything that gives you these anchor points that you can play around with. And last, I'm going to give you guys a few quick ways that you can modify your type using the warp tools. And I actually, I don't think you need to convert this to outlines first, but you can come up to the Object menu, Envelope Distort, and then choose Make with Warp. And you can do a lot of this stuff in Photoshop as well, but I just wanted to show you guys how it works in Illustrator because it's a little bit, this is what Illustrator is made for. So here you'll see that you have some options like arc, horizontal, or vertical, and you can control the amount of the bend that you have, and just make sure that you have the preview box checked off. But you'll see this a lot in logos where it's kind of arced one way, or maybe it's bent or curved, a bulge kind of effect, or even arc upper or arc lower. Alright, so if you do something like that, now you'll notice that you have these kind of 3 columns, but you don't have the anchor points. So what you want to do to get that is to come back up to the Object menu, come down, and choose Expand. And this is kind of similar to creating outlines. It's just going to break your type or your shape down into these points again. So once you've done that, now you have a little bit more control over the shape itself. And that's basically all it's doing. It's converting your live type into a shape. So just be mindful that you can no longer just come in and change your type like we could before. Once you create outlines, you can no longer change the type itself. But you can still ungroup these letters and move them around individually. Right? Say you want to change the spacing, you can do that very easily. Or if you wanted to even make this shape a bit larger and maybe add an underline or something like that to it, you would just do the same thing. Come back to Make with Warp, check off Preview, and then put a little bit of a bend to it. And from here you can just kind of tweak it a little bit to make it fit. Right? I would do the same thing though where I want to expand it, hit OK, and then switch to your direct selection tool by pressing A and just tap these points up a little bit to kind of make it fit. Now if your line still isn't fitting the way that you want it to, what I would do is kind of create a shape like this, overlay it on the type, and try to match the curve itself. Right? So something like that, or if you actually raise this up a little bit, you can overlay it on top of the type and then knock the shape out. Oops, there's a little extra point there that we had because our line wasn't long enough to cover the width of the whole word. So I'm just going to modify that, do it one more time, and now it kind of fits a little bit better. Right? But for some reason it didn't knock it out of our F because we had ungrouped our type. So make sure you group these things before you unite or subtract from the shape. So what's happening here is it's all grouped together, but when we try and subtract it, it's only doing it on one letter. So I'll show you guys a quick workaround for this. Instead of doing the minus front option, let's do divide again. Alright, so now we've divided it, and you'll see that you can select these little pieces in here to come in and just delete those. Alright, so now your line fits nicely under the type. So those are just some ways that you can create interesting shapes using various tools in Adobe Illustrator. But let's say you wanted to do something like make with mesh. There's something cool that I just discovered kind of recently that I wanted to show you guys. So let's say you have a couple of lines. I'm just going to copy it, select them both, and come over here to Blend and choose Blend Options, Specified Steps, let's say about 12. Now we can use the Blend tool to create these lines, and it'll blend from one line to the other. And I have some other tutorials and videos that go into the blend tool a little bit more, but I just want to show you quickly what this does. If you come back to Object, Envelope Distort, Make with Mesh, you can leave these settings as is, but basically the rows and columns are the number of lines that you have intersecting your mesh. So once you have this, again, just come over to your direct selection tool and you can select any of these points, and then you can use the scale tool and hold down the shift key to increase or decrease these points, right? And again, if you wanted to do this on this row and maybe you want to make it smaller, you just hold down shift and drag downwards. So it creates this cool kind of wavy effect. You can also do this with the rotate tool, right? You just select your points, grab the rotate tool, and then you can turn it. So there's another thing that you can do using shapes in Illustrator. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this lesson. These are just some of the ways that you can use shapes to make your designs better, and I've shown you examples of how you can use it in logos, also some examples in posters and illustration, film posters, layout, and things like that. So hopefully you guys will start to see these things and to be able to identify them when they're being used successfully and when they're maybe not so successful. But the basic idea here is just to get a better understanding of shape, as it is one of the most important elements of design. So thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please give us a thumbs up, comment, or subscribe, and be sure to sign up for the email list. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.